What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Mixed Marvel Arts for another Spider-Man comic review. Today we'll be diving into Amazing Spider-Man number 2, where we get to see two brand new villains. And both of these supervillains actually appeared in the Spider-Man Homecoming movie, which is a cool touch. The Vulture makes his first debut in the first story of the comic, and the lesser-known villain named the Tinkerer stars in the second story. So let's dive straight into it. Steve Ditko displays his awesome art style on the first page layout. And then we get into the story. We learn that the Vulture has been robbing New York citizens for the past few days. J. Jonah Jameson is desperate for pictures of the Vulture to include in his newspaper, which is called Now Magazine at this point in the series. When Peter Parker hears his classmates talk about the Vulture and how they'd love to see a close-up picture of him, Peter gets the idea to take hard-to-come-by photos as Spider-Man and sell them. While he brainstorms about this great idea, Flash Thompson and Liz Allen, his classmates, begin making fun of him. Peter is often made fun of by his classmates in the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man, but you will get to see some more great character development from Flash and Liz in future issues. So Aunt May gives Peter a camera, and he decides to test it out. But as Spider-Man is testing out his new camera, the Vulture flies right by him. Peter sees this as an opportunity to snap some pictures and cash in, but his inexperience shows as the Vulture hears him approaching and attacks Spider-Man from behind by kicking him in the head. Vulture throws an unconscious Spider-Man into a tank of water, thinking that he's killed him. And the art here just looks incredible. Spider-Man's suit looks absolutely on point. When Spider-Man escapes from the water tank, he decides to study the Vulture and learn how his wings allow him to fly so quietly and effortlessly. And we see a revolutionary change in Peter's alter ego Spider-Man. First, Peter decides to become a real superhero, rather than putting on shows as Spider-Man to make money. He designs a utility belt to hold extra web cartridges so he won't run out again, as he did in issue number 1. Although we'll definitely still see him run out of web fluid a lot in the future. And second, he decides to sell his high-quality pictures to J. Jonah Jameson, because he thinks it would be funny to make J. Jonah Jameson pay Spider-Man without even knowing it, which was just great storytelling by Stan Lee. When we see J. Jonah Jameson meet Peter Parker for the first time, he's astounded by his pictures of the Vulture. Peter makes J. Jonah Jameson promise to never ask him how he gets his pictures, and he wants to be credited in his newspaper as an anonymous photographer. Of course, this is to maintain his secret identity. The next day, Peter, Flash, Liz, and their classmates attend a highly publicized jewelry exchange that the Vulture has publicly promised to interfere with by stealing the jewelry. And we get this cool shot of Peter walking away from his classmates in case he has to change into Spider-Man if the Vulture appears. Flash and Liz make fun of him as being too scared of potentially seeing the Vulture, while they're excited to see him. So you can see that Peter is really becoming a superhero now by prioritizing the public's safety over his personal life and reputation among his classmates. Just as quickly as the Vulture appears at the scene, he's already gone with the stolen diamonds, and Spider-Man begins to chase the Vulture. In the MCU movies, they actually make fun of how Spider-Man used to refer to his spider sense as a tingle in the early comics. He even says in the final panel on screen right now that he's starting to get a tingle now. That's why in Far From Home, Aunt May calls his spider sense his Peter Tingle. So we see the two characters, Spider-Man and the Vulture, encounter one another again. And the Vulture uses his same trick as last time to try and attack Spider-Man from behind. But Spider-Man senses it this time, and he webs the Vulture's foot to stay onto him. Then he uses a newly designed gadget that prevents the Vulture from being able to fly. Peter suspected the Vulture was using magnetism, so he uses his scientific knowledge to design a gadget that disables the Vulture's wings from working. He defeats the Vulture and snaps some pictures of his arrest to sell to J. Jonah Jameson. We see Peter happily sell the pictures to an ecstatic J. Jonah Jameson in return for a nice stack of cash. Aunt May is really excited and proud of Peter for earning the money, while the Vulture is in prison and begins plotting his revenge on Spider-Man. And it's actually quite funny that the police let him keep his suit on in prison. They do that a lot in the early Spider-Man comics. And then in the second story, we see Spider-Man face a lesser known villain named the Tinkerer. He actually worked for the Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming, in case you didn't know. Peter's science class is visited by a university professor named Cobwell. Professor Cobwell is impressed with Peter's scientific knowledge and requests his assistance with a project over the weekend. But first he asks Peter to pick up his radio from the repair shop. So Peter visits the Tinkerer's repair shop and picks up Cobwell's radio, which was being repaired. His spider sense goes off, but Peter doesn't know why. It turns out the Tinkerer has a group of aliens working in the basement that place microphones in repaired devices so that they can spy on powerful Earthlings. It's a pretty random concept for a Spider-Man comic, but we do get to see the famous shot of Peter's face that is half covered by his Spider-Man mask for the very first time, and it just looks awesome. After Professor Cobwell heads out to lecture some students, Peter rushes back over to the Tinkerer to find out what's really going on in his radio repair shop. And he sees the aliens spying on their repair customers in order to learn more about Earth and eventually take over the planet. Somehow, Peter isn't very surprised by any of this, but regardless, the aliens attack Spider-Man to prevent him from escaping with the knowledge of aliens that are planning to take over the planet Earth. The Tinkerer stuns Spider-Man and traps him in a cage, but Spider-Man uses a perfectly aimed shot from his web shooters to hit the control panel button that unlocks his cage. And then he starts beating up the aliens, destroying their control panel in the process. Spider-Man defeats the Tinkerer and leaves the burning building behind, while the remaining aliens escape to their spaceship. And I can't actually remember if the Tinkerer dies in the building, or if he returns in the future issues. So let me know in the comments, what do you think happens to the Tinkerer in this issue? But then Peter returns to Professor Cobwell's house, and is relieved to see that Cobwell's radio is no longer spying on him. And the issue closes with the reveal that the Tinkerer was actually an alien too, as Peter yanked his mask off during their fight. But that's where the issue ends. The art was phenomenal as usual, and the introduction of the Vulture was a really great story. I love seeing Peter's early days as Spider-Man. Stan Lee has such original concepts for the villains, and for how Spider-Man defeats these villains. The very first encounter between Peter and J. Jonah Jameson in this issue was just awesome. While the second story was good, it wasn't quite as exciting, and the aliens were a bit random. The Tinkerer just wasn't as engaging of a villain as the Vulture was. So because of the second story, I'm going to give this issue an 8 out of 10. If the comic ended after the Vulture story, it definitely would have been a higher rating though. Did you prefer the Vulture or the Tinkerer story? Put your preference in the comments section down below. But that's it for this review. If there are any other comic reviews you want to see, just put it in the comments and I will do my best to review it. Follow the link in my video description to my Twitter if you want to receive more updates and posts about my channel. And if you want to see more comic reviews, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.